On Friday, April 3rd, 2009, it was a beautiful day in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Skies were mostly clear, few clouds, and a light breeze from the south. At the local airport, traffic is beginning to build, with it being the start of the weekend. Dozens of flights are leaving today for destinations all over the United States. It's around lunchtime, and 157 passengers are checking in for Wayfarer Airlines Flight 515 to Chicago. Some are traveling home for the weekend, others going away to visit family and friends, and even some are supposed to be connecting onto onward flights to the East Coast and beyond. Wayfarer is an Albuquerque-based airline and is one of numerous low-cost carriers that sprang up in the United States. They operate a fleet of Boeing 737 and Airbus A330 aircraft. Whereas the latter operate on long-haul routes, the Boeing 737 comprises the backbone of the airline's domestic operations, of which they fly multiple variants. The largest of which is their Boeing 737-900. It is the biggest 737 around, at least at the time. For routes with increased passenger loads like the flight to Chicago, this is an ideal plane. The 900 is part of Boeing's next-generation 737 aircraft. Though the plane in its rawest form dates back to the 1960s, Boeing remade the plane multiple times over the decades, with each generation reflecting changes in the industry. There were upgrades to the engines and avionics, with the plane becoming equipped with state-of-the-art navigation systems and flight displays. Throughout the years, there have been many changes to what goes on in the cockpit, including new technologies that need to be installed on all aircraft. It's going to be another busy day for the Wayfarer crew, as they're just clocking in for the day, and won't be back until later in the evening. It's a crew of 5 today, 2 pilots and 3 flight attendants. Captain Peter Baker will be pilot flying for this journey. In his mid-50s, he's logged over 24,000 total flight hours with an extensive piloting career behind him. He first entered the profession in the 1960s flying mail planes. From there, he watched the industry change dramatically over the decades. He flew the Lockheed Constellation, Boeing 707, 727, and even captained 747s with a major US carrier. However, a few years ago, he took the job at Wayfarer to be closer to family. Being a senior captain at an airline comes with a lot of responsibilities. One of those is occasionally accompanying the newbies, the pilots that come after you, and it's a new pilot who he has in the cockpit today. 25-year-old First Officer Holly White graduated from flying school, achieving her ATPL just 7 weeks ago. She was very lucky in that she scored a placement with Wayfarer right out of the gate, and it's only her second day on the job actually in the seat of the co-pilot. She has just 16 hours logged in the Boeing 737, not including any simulator training or anything like that. On time for boarding, the passengers fill the cabin with just a few seats left over. It's not a full flight, but still considerably packed. Including the 2 pilots and 3 flight attendants, there are a total of 162 souls on board. As the jetway unplugs itself from the fuselage, Wayfarer Flight 515 leaves the gate on time. After engine start, our flight crew received taxi instructions. There was a last-minute change to the flight plan when it was noticed that wind conditions had shifted slightly, favoring an easterly departure using Albuquerque's runway 08. For the pilots, this was a welcome change. It's a much shorter taxi for one, and will also cut out a couple of minutes of flying time in the air too. The geography of Albuquerque is defined by the Sandia Mountains that tower over the city's east side. With peaks of 10,000 feet, these mountains therefore define departures out of Albuquerque's runway 08. Wayfarer 515 must fly the Largo 2 departure. This routing makes an almost immediate left turn after takeoff towards a heading of 350. The departing plane will then follow the course towards the Janos waypoint and then the Rattlesnake VOR before proceeding on course for the rest of their flight plan. This routing therefore will bring the flight over the east side of Albuquerque, and they will have to follow this route north, gaining altitude to clear the mountains. Our pilots power up the plane's 2 CFM56 engines, and the Boeing takes off down the runway. So far, everything is normal. It should be a steady, routine flight ahead. Immediately after departure, Albuquerque Tower hands the plane over to a departure controller. Moments later, Flight 515 makes its expected left turn. Almost as soon as they had established contact with Albuquerque departure, they already handed them off to Albuquerque Center. We must now leave the control tower because controllers for Albuquerque Center operate out of New Mexico's FAA Air Route Traffic Control Center in the north of the city. It is here that our first officer establishes contact with one Donald Margulis. At 60 years old, Mr. Margulis has been handling the skies of New Mexico for decades and is just a few years from retirement. Today is actually his first day back on the job after taking some time off, and for Mr. Margulis, he has spent the last 19 years of his life in the same seat, staring at the same piece of airspace, issuing instructions to aircraft going in and out of New Mexico. The sky isn't particularly busy today, so this afternoon should be a good starting shift for him to get back into the swing of things. In just a couple of minutes, Wayfarer 515 should pass almost directly overhead. Albuquerque Center, Wayfarer 515 climbing through 8,000. This was the initial contact between the flight and controller Margulis. He replied with, "Wayfarer 515, radio check." From his end, he may have had a little difficulty hearing the initial transmission. A radio check message is there to establish that both stations, controller and aircraft, are reading each other clearly. So Holly White on the other end returns with, "Fives on the radio, Wayfarer 515, which means they hear everything loud and clear. Mr. Margulis then gives the Wayfarer plane a simple instruction. Wayfarer 515, Albuquerque Center, roger, climb and maintain 13,000. Donald has a number of planes in his sector, and for a short time he directs his attention away from Flight 515. Meanwhile, on the plane, our pilots adjust their altitude selection, maintaining a steady climb up to 13,000 feet as prescribed. However, before they can even settle in, Donald returns to frequency. Wayfarer 515, traffic 3 o'clock. Donald has issued a traffic advisory here. The pilots have been told to look out for another plane, which should be off to their right. First Officer White leans to look out of the window, but she doesn't see the plane just yet. Traffic is not in sight. Her captain even says, "Do you see the traffic?" And these were the last recorded words on the cockpit voice recorder. Seconds later, disaster strikes. In a single moment, control of the plane is ripped from the pilots. The Boeing rolls over to the right and begins a nosedive towards the ground. The pilots are helpless as the view from their window changes from sky and clouds to the horrifying sight of American suburbs. There is hardly any time to act or think. In the span of just 12 seconds, our routine flight comes to a catastrophic end, crashing into the Loma del Rey neighborhood. 5 homes are completely destroyed. Several more are on fire or sustain significant damage. Incredibly, these homes were mostly empty at the time of the accident. Parents away to work, kids away to school. But unfortunately, when first responders swiftly arrived at the scene, it quickly became clear that there are no survivors. All 162 people on board Wayfarer 515 have been killed. With plumes of smoke rising above the city, Albuquerque Tower has a clear view, and the controller who spoke to First Officer White just a couple of minutes ago picks up the phone and contacts the Federal Aviation Administration and the National Transportation Safety Board. When investigators arrived in Albuquerque within hours, it did not take long for them to establish the main gist of what happened. In fact, news was already spreading locally around the city that there are 2 crash sites. Anyone can see it. There are 2 plumes of smoke that can be seen for miles. Normally, investigators try to keep a clear head, staying clear of all bias and hearsay before moving in. It's important to work with a crash site with a clean slate. That said, the obvious couldn't be avoided. Wayfarer planes wear a white and blue livery. So, why is there a clear transfer of red paint on the fuselage wreckage? A few blocks away at the other crash site, investigators find a propeller mangled into the Boeing 737's tail fin. And then, just a short distance away, there is an entirely different tail structure lodged almost vertically into the roof of a house. It was quickly confirmed this was a clear midair collision, the likes of which have not occurred in the United States for over 20 years. The investigation now wanted to know why. First things first, what plane collided with the Wayfarer jet? Well, through inspection of the wreckage, they found the aircraft registration, pinning the airplane as a Beechcraft King Air C-90, a small 5-seat propeller plane that is often used in private or general aviation, private charters, air taxis, that sort of thing. You don't typically find them in commercial use with regular airlines, but that day this King Air was operating with the call sign Juliet Mike 21 and was en route for arriving at Double Eagle Regional Airport, a general aviation airport in the west of Albuquerque. There were 5 people on board, 1 pilot and 4 passengers, all of whom were also killed in the accident, raising the death toll to 167. The King Air was cleared for an arrival at Double Eagle on runway 35, likely navigating towards the Albuquerque VOR station, which is way out here. Their flight plan happened to cross the same piece of airspace at the same time the Wayfarer flight was departing through. The 2 flights intersected right about here. Now, flights do cross over laterally all of the time, but the problem here is that they were also vertically at the same altitude. Juliet Mike 21 was descending and had already cleared the mountains long before the Wayfarer plane showed up. However, both planes wound up being cleared to the same altitude, the King Air going down to 13,000, with Wayfarer 515 climbing to 13,000, something which isn't supposed to happen. Planes can fly close together like this, but they should be kept separated. If things had gone well that day, the 2 planes would have been kept apart by at least 1,000 feet. Altitude separation being something that became easier for controllers to manage through developments like secondary radar systems. Which brings our attention around to the air traffic controller handling that airspace. Air traffic controller Donald Margulis was questioned by the NTSB, and when those same investigators listened to the recorded tapes from Albuquerque Center, a very tragic understanding begins to unfold. Investigators noticed his speech was very soft, quiet, and unclear. He struggled to keep up with what was going on, even periodically using non-standard communication in transmissions. In one instance, about 1 minute before the accident, he appeared to call out to the King Air using the call sign of Jane Mike 21 instead of Juliet Mike 21, which at first may not seem like much until you understand just what Mr. Margulis was going through during this time. 27 days before the disaster, on March 7, 2009, Mr. Margulis pulled up to the home of his 26-year-old daughter named Jane, only to find that she was in the process of being put into a body bag. Jane, his daughter, according to accounts, passed away the night before. We don't know exactly how this happened, though according to Margulis, Jane had a history of drug use for which she had been rehabilitated for. She had been clean for about 18 months, however apparently relapsed shortly before her passing. The last time Donald saw his daughter alive, he caught her and her then current partner using heroin. Now, we don't know if that was behind her death. No evidence implicating drug use was found at the scene that morning. However, as a side note to this, it's probably worth mentioning that some speculation long after all of this happened had pinned Jane's then partner as a collaborator in the proliferation of a distinctive blue crystal meth that was spiraling out of control in Albuquerque at the time, with supposed Mexican cartel connections and who only knows what else. For Donald Margulis, his daughter's passing absolutely crushed him. Whomst amongst us wouldn't be? He did all he could to support his daughter during what was a difficult time for both of them, and with no other family, this air traffic controller had little else in life other than work, which is probably why he turned up to retake his position at the New Mexico Air Route Traffic Control Center on the day of the accident. Investigators questioned why Donald returned to work so quickly, less than 4 weeks after a devastating family passing, especially when the work in question is the mentally taxing role of an air traffic controller. These are the kind of people who always need to be locked in 100% of the time. In theory, Margulis should have gone through some sort of evaluation after taking extended time off to deal with this, but investigators couldn't find any record of it, and it appears that he just turned back up for work that day. Corroborating this, shortly before taking to his fateful shift, a longtime colleague of his, another air traffic controller, briefly met him in the staff break room, where he supposedly explained that he deemed it better for him to turn up for work. This was him getting back to some sort of normality, this being his way of trying to move on, so to speak. The problem with this is that clearly he had not moved on yet, and this had a detrimental impact on his performance that day. It caused him to lose situational awareness and mismanage the altitudes of the two colliding aircraft. He did eventually notice what was going on and even tried to take corrective action in those final seconds. He told the Boeing to descend and the King Air to climb. However, by that point it was too late and neither plane was in a position to respond. In the aftermath of the disaster, media coverage pinned blame almost entirely on Donald Margulis. About 2 weeks after the accident, he was admitted to hospital for a self-inflicted gunshot wound. It can be easy to point fingers. Folks often want simple explanations for complicated issues, but rarely are things that cut and dry in the world of air accident investigation. Other failures compounded that day. For example, the radar equipment and displays used at Albuquerque Center at the time were old and were in need of replacing. When the NTSB got a look at what controllers were seeing, they were stunned to discover that the information that secondary radar is supposed to provide was often inconsistent or even just incorrect. These kinds of glitches manifested all over the radar system, affecting all kinds of information, including altitudes. It frustrated controllers, they complained, but they just put up with it. The Traffic Collision Avoidance System, often referred to as TCAS, should have been the last line of defense to save lives. Historically, throughout the 20th century, it was a big sky up there, but the aircraft population only ever increased. TCAS was the necessary development born out of the need to prevent midair collisions. TCAS works with the aircraft's transponder and transmits a signal around the plane that can detect other aircraft. If a plane gets too close, TCAS alerts the pilots of its presence, Traffic Advisory or TA. If a plane then continues to get closer, TCAS will issue a Resolution Advisory, RA, an instruction for the pilots to follow to avoid conflict. But pilots need to turn this system on their transponder. They need to select these functions, TA, RA. It then becomes a case of asking, what was the TCAS status on these planes and why didn't it prevent the accident? Well, the wreckage left investigators with some interesting answers. Firstly, the King Air straight up didn't have TCAS. This was a different class of airplane that is held to a different standard compared to commercial airliners. The Federal Aviation Administration's minimum equipment list, published for this aircraft at the time, permits the plane to fly without functioning TCAS, though this is heavily dependent on the type of airspace and the flight plan. That said, the plane's transponder was switched onto Mode C and was transmitting aircraft information as normal. But what about the 737? When the radio panel was recovered, salvaged from the mangled flight deck wreckage, investigators were expecting to see the transponder knob selected to the TA-RA setting, that is, the Traffic Advisory and Resolution Advisory of the TCAS. This being the expected setting to be selected in flight. It's in the before takeoff checklist. The bombshell here is that the transponder was found selected in the standby setting, leaving investigators with the scary scenario that neither plane was operating with TCAS, the very thing that was supposed to prevent this exact type of accident. So investigators now wanted to know how this simple step in the checklist was overlooked. When listening to the cockpit voice recording, they got some answers. As normal, the CVR picked up standard cockpit chatter in the pre-departure at the gate. All proceeded as normal even after the plane pushed back and taxied out to the runway. After they received takeoff clearance, they followed through with completing the before takeoff checklist. The captain called out the items, with First Officer White reading back the status of each item. Landing lights, on. Strobe light, on. Taxi lights. Off. Transponder. Instead of calling out and switching the transponder knob to TARA, Miss White responded with, as required, when that's not what it says. The transponder appears multiple times throughout the Boeing 737 normal checklists, first during the pre-flight, again during the before takeoff, and again in the after landing checklist where it does list transponder as required. Now, we don't know why Holly carried out the checklist in this way. She was an airline newbie, but all of the training should have prepared her for something like this. To be fair, as required also appears for numerous other items even within that checklist, and it's plausible as an inexperienced airline pilot that she fell into a bad habit of saying it. This speaks to broader systemic training deficiencies within Wayfarer's pilot training, doubly so because the captain also appeared to not notice what happened and carried on with the rest of the checklist. It was here that the crew had to verify that the transponder was, firstly, on and also selected to the TARA setting. As required is just such a normal standard phrase when running through checklists. Investigators posited that the transponder slid right under the noses of the pilots. They failed to realize what had been overlooked, and the transponder was openly left in the standby setting. What remains a mystery, though, is that during the very short flight, a notification would have appeared on the Boeing 737's navigation display that would have read TCAS off, or something to that effect. The rest of the cockpit voice recorder yielded no answer to explain this, so what it appears we have here is a flight crew who simply didn't turn on the TCAS. This left one Donald Margulis, a struggling air traffic controller, as the only line of defense to untangle the situation. He was unsuccessful in doing so. One more thing. Happy April 1st. Bye!